law effectively killing the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution as we know it. There will be no such thing as online privacy anymore for any citizen. And this seems to be just the beginning, as the government today has taken total executive control over Google, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and various other online.
Down because he is calling for the creation of a new virtual currency that could ease the reliance of the world on the U.S. dollar, which he says creates some of the problems that we have today. I can explain more of that in a second. He also says the UK outlook, hinges critically on Brexit. Sarah, he is pointing out that, for example, half of all international trade is priced in dollars, but the U.S. that's 5 times greater than the U.S. contribution to world output, along with 2/3 of world securities priced in dollars. And he says the problem there is that U.S. interest rate policy, U.S. exchange rate policy becomes exported to other parts of the world. And he says that is not the optimal way to run things. He acknowledges a long way off, but it's a pretty radical
Where did that come from, Steve? Is he trying to get kicked out of Jackson Hole?
No, but I think what he's dealing with, Sarah, is this idea of why are we having so many problems related to the U.S. being strong but the rest of the world being weak? And he says that's because so much of the world is priced in dollars. So the theory of flexible exchange rates resolving these imbalances is not working. You know, Sarah, this is not the first time this idea has been talked about or floated. There's the special drawing rights from the IMF. But anyway, all these questions that you may have and I have still, we're going to get a chance to talk to Mark Carney about this issue and others, including the outlook for the UK, potential spillovers to the U.S., as well as the rest of the world and emerging markets. So we're going to talk to him at 5:30 today. And just before that, we'll get a chance to maybe ask Rich Clarida, the Vice Chairman of the Fed, about this as well.
Yes, it seems very confusing. I mean, as if these guys didn't have enough challenges on their plate on traditional central banking. They're going to deal with the digital currency. I mean, making monetary policy with that seems...
Payments are sent through a vast network of banks every day. Ripple is a tech company in San Francisco that wants to help banks move that cash from point A to point B faster and more cheaply. But Ripple wants to do that by utilizing a digital token called XRP. Joining us now from Los Angeles to discuss is Bloomberg's Matt Leising, who authored a Bloomberg Business Week piece on this. So we've explained what Ripple is and what it wants to do, but the problem here is that its customers, banks, aren't buying into its proposition.
That's right. We spoke to executives at 7 of the largest banks in the world who are at the heart of the correspondent banking system, where you move money from the United States to Africa or Asia, or corporations need to make payments around the world. None of those executives want to use XRP. They don't want to get involved with cryptocurrencies, and moreover, the customers that they serve, like the Caterpillars of the world, the big corporations, they don't have an appetite for it either.
So let's be clear about Ripple's role in this. A year ago, there was this token XRP that was worth less than a penny. At one point early this year, it peaked over $3, a gain that blows Bitcoin completely out of the water. But what your reporting is showing is that while the banks that work with Ripple are interested in some of the Ripple's software and fintech stuff, the currency, they don't have any interest in it.
Correct. And it's interesting, in 2018 in the cryptocurrency world, this is where we are. A private company that controls this digital token that it created many years ago can value that token in the market, and it's worth more than $80 billion. It's like a company has found a way of creating its own money. And what we were interested in is we understand that the value of that digital money is based on the fact that banks and payment companies will use this digital currency to move money around the world, and yet that's not happening.
Matt, walk us through the gap between the perceptions in your reporting and what the company says. How much emphasis is the company putting strategically on the $1
billion of that in escrow a few months ago, and they are slowly releasing some of that to sell to exchanges and to sell to market makers as a way to make sure that there's XRP out there if people want to use it. What we wanted also to sort of address was the concern that this has gotten into the public markets, and retail investors and mom and pops can buy XRP. And to us and to a lot of people we spoke to, that didn't make a lot of sense, because this is something that's meant to be used just in this internal system between banks around the world.
Yeah, and we have a chart here on the Bloomberg that shows how Ripple had done very well at the end of last year and the beginning of this year. Ripple is the line, the purple line at the top there, outperforming everyone else, including Bitcoin in white, Litecoin in blue, and Ethereum in yellow.
Matt, finally, it seems like within the crypto community, there's a lot of people have their various coins and factions, but a lot of people dislike Ripple and think it's sort of a fake crypto and a centralized crypto. In your reporting, what did the people, what were non-Ripple people saying about XRP?
We had a hard time finding people who could understand and give us a good reason for why the value of XRP has gone up so significantly in the last 3 months. Again, it's sort of like Ripple is not pitching itself as the next Visa or even like Bitcoin, where you can go out and use XRP to buy something at the store or coffee or whatever. It's really this focused on the financial world. And so the idea that people are out there on Twitter and other social media pumping up, like getting people to buy in, it's troubling to a lot of people. And people who spoke to me said, it's not just Ripple. I'm concerned about almost everything in the crypto world for this reason. But with XRP, it is a bit pronounced, because the rise in value at 1,300% has just gotten a lot of attention focused on Ripple, where for many years they didn't have that attention on them.
Remember, I'm from the legal department. I'm supposed to be very conservative about these things. I don't want to go into great details about
Maybe I should take what the IMF is going to do. I think we stunned Ross into silence with that one.
For that to happen, under the current legal framework, some country would have to use a crypto asset as its currency. For that to happen, under the current legal framework, some country would have to use a crypto asset as its currency. Some country would have to use a crypto asset as its currency. Some country would have to use a crypto asset as its currency.
A freely usable international currency. And this is really a milestone. It's historical for many reasons. First of all, it is the first time that the basket of currencies that determine the value of the SDR is expanded. In the past, it has reduced. First time it is expanded. It's the first time that we admit a new currency since the euro. And I think it's critically important for China and for the international monetary system as well. It's part and parcel of the most important currencies in the world. That's really what it means, first of all. Second, it's included in that very exclusive club that define the special drawing right. And, that's in and of itself an indication of the role played by China as an economy, by the renminbi as a currency that is used for international transactions, of the importance that the international community attributes to the renminbi. So it's a consecration, if you will, of the major developments, the major reforms that have been accomplished over the last few years by the Chinese economy. And we're very proud to have walked that journey with the Chinese authorities, particularly with the PBOC, which has been extremely active, I can assure you, in the last couple of years to make sure that the renminbi was properly included, that all the reforms concerning the financial markets in particular and the supervision had taken place, and we are gratified for all this work that was put into it.
Bank of
America customers?
Yes, well, our clients, as you said, are always focused on technology and innovation. The difference in this day and age is the pace of change. And so if you think about it, a lot of the innovations in technology really start with the consumer experience. So our clients as CFOs and treasurers go throughout their normal day and use a QR code at the airport. They use e-signature for rental agreements, even dealing with the governments around the world. Everything's electronic, document upload. It's easy to do business. They expect that from their financial institution. And that's really driving the technology and innovations for us, for our clients, to make it fast, smart, and secure for them to do business with Bank of America.
So what do you believe has been some of the biggest drivers to really have forced technology to change in this way?
So we think of three things. Number one is technology itself. So with the evolution of 5G, that's driving autonomous vehicles, that's driving data organization in a way that AI and robotics can sit on top of that data, is completely different than it was even 2 years ago, 5 years ago, and certainly 10 years ago. Number two is globalization. So the ability to transact around the world at the pace that we can today is also completely different and driving expectations of our clients, especially when it comes to payments and the real-time nature. And then number three, interestingly, is the changing workforce. So when you think about the fact that 60% of our workforce next year will be millennials and Gen Z, 60%. And think about millennials and especially Gen Z, they're digital natives with 90% penetration of smartphone. So their expectations of doing business anytime, anywhere, across any device is really driving the changing nature of the expectation of our clients.
Vision on the future of work and how this project really bridges the gap between public and private sectors.
Well, thank you. And it's a pleasure to be here and to really affirm the United States' commitment to this joint effort, the reskilling revolution, and something that we have been deeply focused on in the United States, making sure that our booming economy works for all Americans and that nobody is left behind or forgotten. So we are believers, and you heard the president's speech yesterday. It was highly optimistic about what is in store in the future. We believe in innovation. We don't want to bridle or harness that. But with innovation comes opportunity, new industries that are being created that never existed before. Look at the growth in cloud computing. Mark knows this as well as anyone. He was an original signer of our pledge committing to reskilling 1 million people over the next 5 years. So we thank you for that, Mark. But there are industries that are being created that require new skills, and there are industries that are being disrupted, and then there are industries that are continuing, but the people working in those jobs today are going to require new skills to do their same job tomorrow. So we are taking a holistic approach to this at the United States government and look forward to this convening and opportunity to learn from each other. We've certainly learned on the apprenticeship front. There are great examples here in Switzerland, in Germany. One of my first foreign trips was to Berlin, where I toured Siemens, one of the world-class examples.
The technology enablers are now there, and we're going to be making that transition, just as we are into self-driving cars, into things like digital currency transactions without hardly even noticing it. For example, when you buy that cup of coffee at Starbucks and you pay on your mobile phone, it could be that the application program interface in your phone last week flipped from using your bank account to a payment system based on digital currencies. And you might have gotten a brief notice with 5 pages of fine print saying, I agree at the end. And as long as you hit that button, you just made that transition without noticing it. I think it could be at the consumer level as quick as that. That's not to say that it's simple. Hundreds of billions of dollars of technology, software and hardware need to be built around this, particularly software, and a lot of legal work and a lot of regulatory work. And the central banks have to go along with it before it'll be allowed, because it's a concern. It's part of the money supply, and central banks will be responsible for monitoring that. And there are some countries that are thinking about it. China, Sweden, those are 2 countries that are currently contemplating introducing digital currencies at the national level through the central banks of those countries. So change is coming, and I'm very interested in studying the implications.
All right, so Facebook, we believe, announcing crypto plans tomorrow. There's broad speculation that this will be some sort of cryptocurrency that can be used internally within Facebook's walls to make payments on Facebook and within Facebook's other services like Instagram. What's your take?
Well, look, I think it's an incredibly positive signal for the overall blockchain and crypto market to have a player like Facebook leaning in. You know, I think there's been obviously a lot of skepticism in the origins of crypto coming from kind of an anti-government and anti-bank point of view. To see major industry players lean in and participate in the market, I think is a really positive for the overall market. It'll be really interesting to see what part of the market they focus on. David Marcus has been an incredible leader, and given his experience at PayPal, I expect we'll see them do something very consumer-y oriented part of the payment system. But I think it's, you know, I'll be watching as alongside everyone else to see what they decide to pursue. And I think what I've heard is the technology isn't quite ready to go live, but sometime in 2020 they'll be out there actually deploying that. For me, what MoneyGram and the stuff we're doing today is the key difference. It's what can we do today with these technologies to solve real problems. And I think it's been really hard for the people following this industry to separate what is noise and what is actual real and pragmatic today.
Now, that said, do you have any concern that what Facebook will unveil will make Ripple less relevant?
I don't think so. I mean, you know, Facebook is obviously a consumer-oriented company. Instagram, WhatsApp, it's a very consumer-oriented company. What Ripple is doing is in really enterprise infrastructure and interconnecting various payment networks around the world. So we're working with some of the biggest banks around the world, small payment providers, and really providing that interoperability between the different networks as opposed to solving within a network kind of problem. So I think it's, you know, it's just very, very different than what I expect they're going to be doing.
While e-wallet services are the fastest growing form of digital payments in Singapore, consultancy firm Deloitte says at the same time payment providers are expanding their services through tie-ups with merchants.
Michelle Tito tells us more as part of the CNA Digital Economy Leadership Summit.
Increased services for users have encouraged the boom of digital payments. For 30-year-old Neng Yishi, it's made going out a lot easier.
It's brought about a lot of convenience for me because nowadays I don't even bring my wallet around. Okay, my credit cards are all stored in my phone as under the Apple Pay system. So I can pay for a cup of coffee, a cup of tea without, even using cash at all.
Experts say mobile e-wallets are the fastest growing digital payment method amongst consumers today, and the biggest winners in the digital payment space would be those who build an ecosystem offering a suite of services.
For such players to be really, to be able to compete effectively, I think they must have certain capabilities. So things like economies of scale, able to provide fun and differentiated products and services are important. For example, if you look at some of the ride-hailing apps, I think they have existing customer base. So there's an ecosystem, and if they then pile on with other ecosystems, so there's an existing ecosystem that they are working on.
To build on their payments ecosystem further, some digital payment providers who have already acquired millions of users are now shifting their focus to cater to the SME merchants on their platform.
2019 has been a year whereby we rolled out so many services and we're able to drive stickiness with our end consumers like you and me. But we also realized that merchants have a huge need to grow, and especially in this kind of more volatile and dynamic environment. There are basically three ways merchants want to grow. One, to grow from offline to online. Two, to basically expand their business. Third, to ensure that there's repeat footfall back to their stores.
So we have already partnered with financial institutions, banks, so that using the data from digital payments, we're now able to somehow convert that to a credit score, lend that back to small, medium businesses.
But while these efforts can help providers gain market share, experts say the local market may be too small and there's a need to think beyond Singapore. Singapore is expected to be even more cashless in the near term, as authorities are ramping up efforts plans to reduce cash withdrawals from ATMs by the end of this year.
Listening to me, take out a couple of euro banknotes and look at them. It features all sorts of architectural design, bridges, windows, doors, pillars that are actually the symbol of our European culture. We talk about the greenback for the dollar. Well, maybe the euro should be the blue bridge or some architectural device that is shared between the 19 countries. And this highlight, despite our diversity, shows that we share a culture that is largely rooted in that common heritage and that has never been contained by national boundaries. The other common feature, under this shared heritage, is the security feature that you will see on your banknote. The hologram and the watermark, what do they look like? But they look like the portrait of Europa, a figure from Greek mythology which serves as the face of the euro. So it is clear that when I sign my name in a few minutes, I will not simply be undertaking a procedural and bureaucratic task for future issuance of banknotes, but it's also a huge privilege and a task that I endorse on behalf of the entire ECB and the euro system to actually protect the euro and act as the custodian of that currency, which is our shared value. So far, I think the system and the ECB have done a fine job. Support for the euro has reached an all-time high, with 76% of our citizens now in favor of the single currency. 76% of our citizens favor the euro as a currency. Trust in our currency exists, and it is our duty to protect it, to enrich it, to make progress. And as
relatively fast digital payment options. Besides debit and credit cards, you have PayPal and Google Pay and Apple Pay, Venmo, Zelle and Square, and some others, each of which has its unique virtues and is especially good for particular kinds of payments. And they're not just fast, relatively, they're fast and they're cheap, and they're often more reliable than legacy payment systems. PayPal for online shopping, Venmo for sending money to your friends, Apple Pay if you use an iPhone, Google Pay if you've got an Android phone and a Gmail account, Square if you don't want to have a separate account as well as your bank account, and so on. But these fast payments providers don't generally offer fast back-end services. On most of these systems, it takes 2 or 3 days for accounts to settle, and therefore the risks of older style payments are still present, albeit not as great. Zelle is the one exception. It's run by a consortium of banks, and in that system, funds are instantly available to the payees, but even on Zelle, final settlement takes a day or sometimes more if you've got weekends or holidays to deal with. So banks, in that case, are exposed to some risk. My second tale is that of a new back-end fast payment system, the RTP for real-time payment system, developed with the Fed's active encouragement by another consortium of private banks called the Clearing House, or TCH for short. Now, it just so happens that TCH began life as this nation's second ever clearinghouse after the Suffolk system in New York in 1815. RTP's basic workings are very similar, in fact, uncannily similar to the workings of the old Suffolk system. Any bank can participate, and non-bank service providers, assuming they don't have a special purpose national bank charter, can appoint a participating bank to serve as their agent. Participants have to pre-fund balances held in a jointly owned RTP account at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York with pre-funding requirements based not on their size, as in the Suffolk system, but on their anticipated activity. As the balances are used, the banks have to top them up again, in this case by transferring funds from their ordinary Fed master accounts to the RTP joint account. Settlement of payment orders between RTP participants, that is, the customers of those participants, takes place instantly, and it does so 24/7 through debits and credits to and from individual balances in the joint account. The system also allows payment orders to be accompanied by messages and information concerning, for example, what the payment was for, payment confirmations, and that makes it especially attractive to businesses that can save a lot of money on resource management costs. So we have seen some progress, after all, since 1819. But the picture isn't entirely rosy. Just as the Suffolk system met with resistance from some small country banks, so RTP has met with resistance from some smaller community banks who don't like the idea of having to pay a big bank TCH consortium for fast payment services. But the truth is, those services are very cheap. RTP has a flat fee structure that actually favors smaller banks. There are no volume discounts. There's no volume commitments, and there are no monthly minimums. And I think that's
for positive change. One example is Ripple. It's a platform used to make international monetary transactions faster and cheaper. Now, one way Ripple facilitates that is by using the cryptocurrency XRP. I asked CEO Brad Garlinghouse to explain what XRP actually is and how it all works. Listen in.
XRP is like a Bitcoin. It's a digital asset. It's today the third most valuable digital asset. And what we do is we take a transaction between banks, and instead of having a bank pre-fund an account at the other bank, which is how correspondent banking works today. The Bank of Brad in dollars would pre-fund the Bank of Julia, perhaps in pounds, and then I would debit and credit that. But that means I have to pre-fund and have dormant capital sitting at that other bank. What we allow banks to do, we allow payment providers to do, is to tap into the liquidity of XRP liquidity. So today there's lots of liquidity between XRP and US dollar. There's lots of liquidity between XRP and British pound. And you could tap into that to move value in real time, in seconds. And even compared to Bitcoin, which takes up to 12 minutes to complete one transaction, XRP is extremely fast at about 3 seconds per transaction. That has meant XRP is extremely scalable in contrast to how Bitcoin works.
So it basically goes, Bank Brad has dollars get transferred to XRP, then XRP is transferred to sterling, and sterling then hits Bank Julia. That's how it works.
That's exactly right. And so from a consumer point of view and how we're working with, for example, a MoneyGram, the consumer itself doesn't actually see that it's flowing through XRP to solve their problem. What the consumer sees is simply a better product at a better price. That's good for MoneyGram, that's good for MoneyGram's customers. And so we're seeing more momentum than we've ever had around using XRP to move this liquidity around the world. And so we couldn't really be happier about how that has played out in a world where there's still a lot, I think, of FUD, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of doubt about what's going on in crypto. This is a real use case solving a real problem for real customers.
Okay, so which banks right now are
signed up about over 200 banks around the world. Some of those banks just use our software to do that debit and credit, fiat to fiat, and some of them are using XRP in those flows. We have banks like Santander that we've been working with for years and are moving lots of volume through the Ripple's technology. And then, as I mentioned earlier, payment providers like MoneyGram or RIA or Asimov that are using XRP actually to move that liquidity and really reducing their costs and improving the product.
Just in terms of the transactions, though, that you're seeing using Ripple, what proportion of those actually use XRP versus direct? And just where do you see that ratio going? I'm just trying to get a sense of sort of how much XRP itself is actually used as part of the Ripple platform.
So I would say the order of magnitude way to think about it is similar to the proportion of customers. So if we've got, I don't know, a couple hundred customers we have launched, 10 to 15 of them we've talked about using XRP. I would use that ratio as the total ratio between what's happening with Ripple's technology overall.
XRP, like Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, has been volatile. I asked Brad if the message to investors is don't use XRP to speculate.
People are going to speculate on different asset classes. People speculate on gold, currencies. You name it, people are going to speculate. When we think about this, and what I've said very publicly is I think the long-term value of any digital asset is going to be derived from the utility it delivers. There is a lot of hype in the crypto market space. We've seen that even recently. A lot of attention around what's going on with Libra and Facebook's announcement around Libra. Today, that's just a white paper. It actually isn't. It isn't live. It hasn't launched. And so I think the hype often gets ahead of reality in many technologies, and I think that's true in the crypto space as well. What I would encourage any person looking at this marketplace is to really understand what is real, what is not real, and understand, is there a use case? Is there a utility? Bitcoin, I'm long Bitcoin, and Bitcoin I think has real utility around being a store of value. It's digital gold. But if
7 years ago, has the world's financial system changed due to technology? And is there any impact to you and to IMF?
Well, I'll give you a very, very basic example. At the International Monetary Fund, 7 years ago when I started as managing director, there was the word fintech was not in current use in the institution. Now, we have a lot of economists and financial experts actually working on fintech and trying to identify what are the benefits and the threats as a result of fintech. You can think of the use of
so just
mobile
threats, not opportunities?
Well, it's both. No, it has. Let me say a word about opportunities. When you talk about mobile banking, you look at countries like Peru, like Kenya, like the Zambia, like many other sub-Saharan African countries where people, and women in particular, did not have access to financing, did not have the ability to transact, and were at threat of being robbed, of being abused. And mobile banking, coupled with other financial technology innovations, helped them, gave up the ability to be empowered, to be economic players. That's just one aspect in developing societies of fintech. On the other hand, you have the development of some interesting cryptocurrencies at the margin of the financial system, where clearly supervision, regulations have to play a role in order to maintain stability and to keep at bay the dark transactions that happen and that are transacted using some of those cryptocurrencies. So it has huge benefits, but it has its risks as well. So technologies generally outside the financial sectors are expected to improve productivity, which is something that all societies, policymakers are in search of in order to improve the living standards and the income of people.
All the rent through your digital tokens or tokenization. So fintech and proptech, currently the two largest markets which we are entering into the tokenization. So all the derivatives, all the real estate would be tokenized, and it's like a 700 trillion USD per year. And they will definitely be digitized by using such technologies as universal, as through CBDC, through stable coins, square meters, all other assets. It might be gold, it might be intellectual property, it might be user-generated content, or it might be your working hours. All such things would be easily tokenized. So if you
also in a period of transition, next stop, the digital platform, the key to staying relevant in the cross-border payment industry. I spoke to Chairman and CEO Alex Holmes and asked him to explain what MoneyGram does and how it's tackling broader digitization. Listen in.
The core remittance space, so migrants, hundreds of millions of migrants, moving to other countries to find opportunities, send money back home to support their friends and families and improve the lives of those in the countries that they came from. We traditionally have operated globally, through what we would call an agency network, so 350,000 locations in 200 countries around the world. But recently, in the last several years, we've been going through what we call a digital transformation, really trying to modernize our company and keep up with all the changes in technology and all the things that are happening, at the forefront of digital and communications and telecom and mobile and all the other exciting things.
Yeah, that is exactly the question I was going to ask you. In an increasingly digitized world, what proportion now of your overall transactions are done in some form via digital versus in store, in the local presence that you've talked about? What's the split right now?
Right. No. So, the World Bank is probably the foremost leader in measuring the percent of the industry that is moved digital. And so today they'd say, roughly speaking, about 60% of all transfers around the world are done still through cash. In our business, we're catching up quickly. About in the last quarter, we just surpassed 20% of our global transactions are now done digitally. So we've improved our capabilities quite considerably, really, in the last 18 to 24 months, and just past 60 countries where we have digital capabilities enabled. So we're very excited about that. We're leading that with a lot of online direct consumer platforms, a brand new app that we've rolled out, new technologies for us like transaction notifications, a really exciting, revamped, and enhanced loyalty program. And it's really driving a lot of attraction and really, in many ways, which is really interesting, Julia, a completely new customer demographic for us. About 85% of all of our customers that transact digitally
Chose Ripple because you think they right now have the best platform to do this most efficiently.
I think they not only have the best platform to do it efficiently, but they also have the vision that I think encapsulates what we're trying to do as well, right? How do you drive down costs? How do you improve throughput? How do you drive efficiency and provide a better service not only for our customers, but also for the future and potential customers that are coming? And so, I think Ripple and its, cryptocurrency XRP is really innovative in that sense. They've driven well over 300 partners around the world. Some of those are banks, some of those are other remittance providers like MoneyGram. And so there's just sort of an infinite possibility as you build out, that network and the associated touch points through that channel and through that capability.
Is it bringing prices down? You've said it's quicker to use their technology and their platform, the settlement's quicker. But is it also bringing costs down? Are you able to pass that cost reduction on to customers too as a result of using Ripple's platform and XRP, the digital currency, to do this?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So there's a lot of things driving costs and price in a market. And so if you think about, generally speaking, it should be very, very quick. It should be very inexpensive to move money cross border. But the truth is, it is not today. And that is largely because of the cost of foreign exchange, it's the cost of banking services, it's the speed at which you can actually move money and make these things happen. And so companies like MoneyGram have innovated for years to try to drive the best solution possible. But, as I was saying earlier, to have liquidity parked in all these markets around the world for the purposes of instant settlement actually takes a lot of working capital, it takes a lot of cash, and it takes a lot of forward thinking to pre-position money out there. And if you also think about currencies never really being stable, currencies are always quite volatile, and so the fluctuations in that is moving all the time. If a customer wants to send $300 from the U.S. to Mexico, we're
digital currency XRP, cross-border transfers can be notoriously tough. So I got right to the point with MoneyGram's CEO. Why Ripple? Listen in.
Most people probably really don't understand about money and the movement of money is that it's incredibly complicated to move money cross-border. One of the things that we talk about quite a bit internally is that, money doesn't actually move, right? Data moves. And so it's a really cumbersome process to run what we call the net settlement engine to enable the cash to be available in all of those markets for settling into bank accounts or actually paying out cash to consumers. And so we have a lot of what we call liquidity and working capital positioned all around the world, 122 different currencies, many different bank accounts and associated pieces that really help us to facilitate the flow so we can actually move money instantly, right, without actually moving money. So what's interesting about Ripple and what's happening in the blockchain and crypto space is for the first time, there's a technology available that has the potential to truly transform that capability and actually, move money with data, which to me is just, kind of magical in a lot of ways, because that's really what the future is all about. How do you instantly transfer funds? How do you instantly sort of transform the business without all of this, as Brad would say at Ripple, with all this trapped liquidity, around the world. And so that's what's exciting about Ripple. That's what's exciting.
Payments are sent through a vast network of banks every day. Ripple is a tech company in San Francisco that wants to help banks move that cash from point A to point B faster and more cheaply. But Ripple wants to do that by utilizing a digital token called XRP. Joining us now from Los Angeles to discuss is Bloomberg's Matt Leising, who authored a Bloomberg Business Week piece on this. So we've explained what Ripple is and what it wants to do, but the problem here is that its customers, banks, aren't buying into its proposition.
That's right. We spoke to executives at 7 of the largest banks in the world who are at the heart of the correspondent banking system, where you move money from the United States to Africa or Asia, or corporations need to make payments around the world. None of those executives want to use XRP. They don't want to get involved with cryptocurrencies, and moreover, the customers that they serve, like the Caterpillars of the world, the big corporations, they don't have an appetite for it either.
So let's be clear about Ripple's role in this. A year ago, there was this token XRP that was worth less than a penny. At one point early this year, it peaked over $3, a gain that blows Bitcoin completely out of the water. But what your reporting is showing is that while the banks that work with Ripple are interested in some of the Ripple's software and fintech stuff, the currency, they don't have any interest in it.
Correct. And it's interesting, in 2018 in the cryptocurrency world, this is where we are. A private company that controls this digital token that it created many years ago can value that token in the market, and it's worth more than $80 billion. It's like a company has found a way of creating its own money. And what we were interested in is we understand that the value of that digital money is based on the fact that banks and payment companies will use this digital currency to move money around the world, and yet that's not happening.
Matt, walk us through the gap between the perceptions in your reporting and what the company says. How much emphasis is the company putting strategically on the success and adoption of XRP?
For us is that if I look at where we were about a year back, the rideshare business had not rationalized on a global basis the way that it has now. And the profitability that we have seen, the margins coming out on rideshare, have increased, frankly, at a substantially higher rate than we expected internally. And we now have a team that is executing at a level, like every single P&L we're going after. The teams are building technology that is automating a bunch of tasks that were done manually, so we'll do it cheaper, better, et cetera. And so the rideshare business is actually looking better today than it was 6 months ago, and substantially better. And that has allowed us essentially to move up the path of profits. That said, before all the WeWork stuff, we made some painful choices internally, right? We laid off 1,000 people. Yeah, over 1,000 people. It happened before the WeWork stuff. And it was because we started recognizing that this is a business that's expected to return on capital. This is a business that we are enormous transactions, but at very, very low margins. And if you're running a big scale, global, low margin business, you have to start acting like it.
Okay, but do you remember when we would talk in years past, we often talked, or you talked about Uber being like Amazon?
It is a big time move in XRP today, basically the parent company of Ripple. The crypto shooting higher after blockchain startup got an eye-popping valuation. Kate Rooney is out in San Francisco with the details. When they sent me the story, I said, well, Kate screwed up. That can't be, billion. It's got to be million. What is this?
Ryan, you're reading it right. So Ripple announced a $200 million funding round today, and that money is not in cryptocurrency. The new cash injection brings Ripple's valuation to $10 billion, making it one of the most valuable private startups in Silicon Valley. But a key lifeblood of its business has been tanking. Ripple is the majority owner of cryptocurrency XRP and sells it every quarter to help fund the business. Ripple also uses XRP as a so-called bridge currency for cross-border transactions. XRP had skyrocketed alongside Bitcoin 2 years ago. It's now down roughly 50% this year, while Bitcoin has actually rallied 80%. Ripple's main business is a cross-border payment system built on blockchain that's used to send money around the world. The startup says it now has 300 customers globally and inked deals with MoneyGram, Santander, and American Express. Brian.
That's a good story. It's a big one. Kate Rooney out in San Francisco, thank you very much. So let's put that $10 billion valuation into perspective, shall we, gentlemen?
Let's do it.
It is bigger than the market caps of Bed Bath & Beyond, Whirlpool, and Planet Fitness. So does Ripple really belong in the $10 billion club, Guy Dummy?
I don't think so, but this is not my skating rink. This is not
your
my
fort.
Oval. It's not my
your
forte.
It's fort. It's actually.
But I mean, the market decides that. I don't decide that. So if the market, as they said, remember the movie Coming to America? It's Mama named him Clay. I'm calling him Clay. Well, if it's worth $10 billion to them, it's worth $10 billion to me. Does that make sense?
Is there some of this, Carter, and in all seriousness, where you see these kind of valuations? Listen, I don't understand. Somebody understands something that I don't understand or we don't understand. But you're seeing just so much money thrown at these companies, and you look at Uber and all these others that are having trouble. What does it tell you about a macro?
Well, then the alternative argument is you need a centralized. You can't have it decentralized, that it actually benefits from efficiencies. I would assume you come down in the latter.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I think anytime you can do something without that central counterparty, you're going to reduce friction, which is measured by time, cost, speed. So by removing that central counterparty and going direct from point to point, you can skip going from the Bank of David to the Bank of Morgan to the Bank of Mike. You just go directly to the Bank of Mike.
So if the immediate opportunity is efficiencies in this area of the actual kind of nuts and bolts sort of plumbing of the financial system, how does that relate to the value of the Ripple tokens or of the Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies? They're taking on a separate life, it seems, from the future of adoption of this technology.
It's a great point, and I think one of the things we all have to remember is that the value of a token over the long term is really going to be derived by its utility. What problem is it solving? How big is that problem? How many customers do you have? There's no question there's a lot of hype in this system, and I don't actually think that's a good thing. For Ripple, we use this digital asset called XRP to settle liquidity needs between banks. So today there's $27 trillion parked at different banks around the world so they can make payments between each other. Our view is you can use a digital asset like XRP to do that in real time. Because XRP has been so efficient, it settles a transaction about 3 seconds compared to Bitcoin.
So it just passes through that currency for that period of time.
That's correct.
A great distribution network working with the partners and enabling Elizabeth to be able to send money back home. So let's roll with that.
You've partnered with a lot of the traditional banking systems to help kind of improve this payments industry and help speed up a lot of that cross-border action. How big is that market for you, partnering with those more traditional banks?
So today, most of the cross-border business is dominated by banks or PSPs. So they own 100% of the market, and that's what we are after, because what we are doing is we are changing the plumbing, which is the old plumbing, and replacing it with the post-internet era plumbing. And with that, the same financial institutions could be instant, they could be error-free, and they can make sure that they're able to provide the service to Elizabeth in a very transparent manner. So when you send your dirhams back to GBP in London, you should exactly know how much money will get delivered back home. And that's what we can do today with our existing financial institutions. Also, we're able to use cryptocurrency XRP, which is a bridge asset, to provide liquidity on demand. So one of the reasons remittances are so expensive is because they use something called as a pre-funded Nostro account. Once that cost is taken away from the financial institution, that means they can fund on demand. They would be able to provide much better service and cheaper service to their customers like Elizabeth.
When we talk about many of the big players in this payments industry, they're primarily coming out of the U.S. or China, many of them. Do you think there's room for companies here in the Middle East to get to that size and scale?
Firstly, I think that's a huge opportunity, right? So if you look at ecosystem in the US. US has a large domestic market. It has got the VC funding, and companies can experiment with a regulatory framework that essentially exists today. Same opportunity exists in the Middle East. It's the largest remittance market in the world. If you take GCC as combined, you talked about Mbadla putting fund aside to give to companies who want to create new business ideas. And then all we need is aspiration, all we need is energy to be able to create new business models. And to my mind, I wouldn't be surprised if over the next 5 years, there are 2-3 global brands that originate out of GCC in the remittance space. So if you look at somebody like Finabler, which is a customer of Ripple and is a global brand, and I think there should be many more following them.
A lot of updates this year with Ripple and RippleNet, which is your blockchain that many financial institutions are using. Can you give us an update on what's going on and how they're using it, who's using it?
Absolutely. So I think, Ripple, I think, has been really fortunate in the context of the broader blockchain and crypto ecosystem. We've been very focused on a specific customer set, a specific problem around cross-border payments. We've been selling into banks and financial institutions for a few years now. We've signed up over 200 banks and financial institutions globally. Recent ones we've talked a little bit about things like MoneyGram. We announced a very big partnership with in, I guess, June. They went live in July and August, and actually even in their earnings call in August, we're talking about how they're tangibly seeing the benefits of using XRP to help facilitate their liquidity needs. So we feel really good about the momentum we have there. And even this week announced some partnerships in the crypto-specific area with BitPay, a company that allows you to use cryptocurrencies to check out at like a PayPal checkout or Visa checkout. Now we'll be supporting XRP, and CoinMe, an ATM network that will also be supporting XRP going forward. So excited about both of those.
And if I understand correctly, MoneyGram is actually using XRP in its transactions, which marks a big evolution for you because there are some financial institutions who are using Ripple but not actually XRP. Can you explain how that evolved and how that's going?
So I think, a lot of times, I talk about the more than 200 banks and financial institutions we're working with, most of them sign up and engage us on a fiat to fiat basis. Dollar to yen, dollar to Mexican peso, dollar to Argentinian peso. And that's because that's how the correspondent banking network works today. In effect, some people describe what Ripple's original product and initial product is called kind of Swift 2.0. Swift is what correspondent banks use for messaging to debit and credit the pools of liquidity. And when I say pools of liquidity, I mean like pre-funded accounts. The Bank of Jen and the Bank of Brad would have accounts at each other's banks, and you might be Mexican peso, I'd be dollar, and we debit and credit those with messaging. That works if the accounts are pre-funded. And what we have found is there's more efficient ways to manage liquidity. If you as a bank don't have to put money at my bank and I don't have to put money at your bank, I can use that money for other things. It's working capital. MoneyGram, as an example, has several $100 million of negative working capital. They're a public company. That's material to their business for sure. If by working with them, they can reduce the amount of pre-funding, that is very accretive to how they think about the use of capital and what they can do with that if they didn't have that negative working capital out there.
I know some of the hesitation from some of these financial institutions is that XRP, being a cryptocurrency, has some added volatility risk as opposed to, fiat currency, dollars, pesos, whatever it might be. How do you get over that, or how do you overcome that risk?
It turns out this is a risk that is a little bit of a red herring, and it's born of, I'll use Bitcoin as an example. A Bitcoin transaction has taken as long as 8 or 10 hours on highly intense days of activity on the Bitcoin blockchain. So if you have to hold Bitcoin for 8 hours while you settle a transaction, that's a lot of volatility risk. An XRP transaction is always about 4 seconds long. So if you're only holding a highly volatile asset for 3 or 4 seconds versus holding fiat, a low volatile asset, for a Swift transaction, maybe 3 days, it turns out the volatility risk, because it's such a short amount of time, is lower using an XRP transaction than it is using a Swift transaction that might take 3 days. Now, I think people don't really understand that today, and part of the misinformation and education for us is helping people understand that. But I think that's part of the crawling and walking and run as crypto goes from, I think, kind of the shadows, frankly, into how do we solve real problems for real customers at scale.
Well, one thing to jump off of that point, stable coins are all the rage right now. Everybody's coming out with a dollar-backed or some other sort of asset-backed coins that they can conduct trades quickly, seamlessly, but also without the volatility. So what would be the advantage of using XRP, for instance, rather than using, one of these more sort of like designed to be fully stable assets?
Yeah, a stable coin like USDC, for example, that Coinbase and Circle have done. I think that is interesting in mitigating volatility, but you still have to go from dollar to peso, right? So at some point you have a bridge. Somebody has to bridge that. And in effect, what Ripple's doing is let's make XRP the most efficient, the most liquid, and the easiest to bridge by XRP the most efficient, the most liquid, and the easiest to bridge by selling effectively the connectors on both ends, selling APIs to allow people to connect to both ends of that. If we have hundreds of banks interconnected to use XRP for that, I think that bodes well for the liquidity of XRP.
Because basically, who has the most liquidity is going to win this game.
I mean, that's what I believe. I think different people believe different things, but that's okay.
You have all these financial institutions who are now using XRP. It sounds like more people are using it, and yet the price has declined this year recently. Why do you think that is?
I think if I could predict the price of crypto, I would not be here. I mean, the crypto markets are hard to predict for sure. And in many cases, even now, the altcoin basket is very correlated. And so when I say altcoin, I mean everything but Bitcoin. Bitcoin has outperformed the rest of the crypto industry this year. What that looks like in the future, hard to predict. I think over the long term, meaning 2, 3, 4, 5 years, that correlation, I think, will start to reflect those that have a real use case. I'm very enthusiastic about not just what Ripple is doing, but the community of companies working around the XRP ledger. Coil is a very interesting company doing something around micropayments using XRP, where you really can't use something like Bitcoin for the purpose of micropayments in terms of the cost per transaction or speed appropriate for XRP.
There's a lawsuit hanging over Ripple right now. A group of people are saying that XRP and Ripple are sort of tied together, and that XRP could be considered an unregistered security. What would you say to them?
Well, it's pending litigation, so I'll probably be a little bit muted on the topic. Suffice it to say, we don't think it has merit. These are people who didn't buy XRP from us. We also don't believe XRP is a security. I think, one of the poignant arguments in my point of view is, if I went back to the office and said to the team at Ripple, hey, we're shutting down, XRP trades on 130, 140 exchanges around the world. XRP would keep trading. So you're like, wait a minute. Okay, so if it's a security of what? It's not a security of Ripple. It doesn't give you the rights to dividends or ownership of Ripple, the company. We have shareholders of Ripple, right? We raised a Series A financing, a Series B financing, and we own a lot of XRP, but they're two separate things.
At the same time, we've seen recently Block One had the hammer come down on them from regulators. They were basically said that they were selling an unregistered security.
$24 million.
It's interesting you call that a hammer. They raised $4 billion, and they
it's a light hammer. It's a light hammer.
You and I would never judge what a hammer is.
Maybe it's a fly swatter.
Hammer.
Either way, so what's the difference between Block One and their token EOS versus what you guys are working on?
Well, I think one really important distinction is the XRP ledger existed before Ripple, the company. It's a public blockchain. You can go back and see kind of transactions 0, 1, 2, 3. You can see when Ripple was incorporated in the Secretary of State in California. Ripple didn't create the XRP ledger. The XRP ledger had utility prior to Ripple's existence. Certainly we are an interested party in the success of the XRP ledger, for sure. We own a lot of XRP. But it's a little bit like saying, Exxon owns a lot of oil. That doesn't make oil a security. Exxon's clearly interested in how to, we can argue about the health of the, I'm not here to debate carbon emissions.
Climate crisis, do you want to get into that?
No, this is an example I wanted to choose here, but suffice it to say, Exxon cares a lot because they have a lot of. Last week I was speaking at a Morgan Stanley conference, and somebody asked me, there was this set of headlines about, about the JPM coin. And this guy was from Morgan Stanley who was interviewing me. I said, so is Morgan Stanley going to use the JPM coin? And he's like, well, Probably not, And so, well, is Citi going to use a JPM coin? Is B of A going to use a JPM coin? Is PNC? And the answer is no. And so, does that mean we're all going to have these different coins? And does that mean we're back to where we are, where there's lack of interoperability? So, I don't get it. One more quick thing on the JPM coin. So let's think about this. The JPM coin, they announced for institutional customers, if you give them $1 in deposits, they'll give you a JPM coin that you then can move within the JPM ledger. Wait a minute, just use the $1.
Right.
Well, I really don't understand. If you're just moving it within the JPM ledger, and it has to be dollar to dollar, a one-to-one backing, it honestly doesn't actually, I don't understand what problem that solves. Now, back to my first answer, look, if it solves the problem of JPM being associated as they're leaning into crypto, yay. Mm-hmm. That's all I got.
Right. and understood. And I think that's confusion. Not only look, if this doesn't work out, you could be a comedian. So that's always a good thing if blockchain doesn't work out. But I think that's really what the issue is, even for the broader audience that does understand the technicalities like we do. It still doesn't solve that problem of scalability. So do we have to fix our payment system and focus on the underlying technology? Is that the answer?
Well, I mean, to your point around scalability, when I hear scalability, I think of two things. Mm-hmm. One is transaction throughput, but it's also interoperability, right? I think that there isn't going to be one network to rule them all. There isn't going to be one, you're going to have Alipay, and you're going to have maybe JPM coin, and you're going to have, banks, payment providers, you name it. How do we stitch them together in a way that is as frictionless in terms of cost and speed as possible? So if you want to send, it's Mother's Day and you want to spend $50 US to your grandmother in India from your B of A account and have it show up in her Paytm account, that shouldn't be.
But let me first address a different dimension of technological change: innovation in financial services. What we call fintech offers the potential to significantly increase efficiency and transparency in the financial sector. It poses challenges for established players and regulators who are trying to deal with sources of risk. There are some very real downsides to financial services technological change, including threats from cyber attacks and cyber criminals. Yet I think we're on the cusp of a substantial transformation that could bring enormous benefits. By fostering competition, we can help reorient the financial services industry closer to, we can reorient the financial services industry to better serve the real economy and to foster job creation. Look at fintech's capacity to end financial exclusion for the 1.7 billion people in developing countries who have no access to banking. Much has been said already about the impact of fintech on mobile banking in Africa, a continent that needs to create 20 million jobs a year in decades to come just to deal with its population growth. That's why, together with the World Bank, we developed the Bali FinTech Agenda, which was a framework to help our members take advantage of innovation, but also cope with the new risks that come with that. One aspect of relevance today is the nascent development of central bank digital currencies and the possible emergence of privately backed stablecoins for digital payments. This was highlighted in the recent attention that's been drawn to Facebook's and others' proposals for what they call the Libra coin. These new instruments aim to do for transactions what the internet has done for information, which is to make transactions instantaneous, secure, and nearly free. Yesterday, we published a new paper that highlights the benefits, risks, and regulatory issues that are likely to
55 billion of that in escrow a few months ago, and they are slowly releasing some of that to sell to exchanges and to sell to market makers as a way to make sure that there's XRP out there if people want to use it. What we wanted also to sort of address was the concern that this has gotten into the public markets and retail investors and mom and pops can buy XRP, and to us, and to a lot of people we spoke to, that didn't make a lot of sense, because this is something that's meant to be used just in this internal system between banks around the world.
Yeah, and we have a chart here on the Bloomberg that shows how Ripple had done very well at the end of last year and the beginning of this year. Ripple is the line, the purple line at the top there, outperforming everyone else, including Bitcoin in white, Litecoin in blue, and Ethereum in yellow.
Matt, finally, it seems like within the crypto community, there's a lot of people have their various coins and factions, but a lot of people dislike Ripple and think it's sort of a fake crypto and a centralized crypto. In your reporting, what did the people, what were non-Ripple people saying about XRP?
We had a hard time finding people who could understand and give us a good reason for why the value of XRP has gone up so significantly in the last 3 months. Again, it's sort of like Ripple is not pitching itself as the next Visa or even like Bitcoin, where you can go out and use XRP to buy something at the store or coffee or whatever. It's really just focused on the financial world. And so the idea that people are out there on Twitter and other social media pumping up, like getting people to buy in, it's troubling to a lot of people. And people who spoke to me said, it's not just Ripple. I'm concerned about almost everything in the crypto world for this reason. But with XRP, it is a bit pronounced, because the rise in value at 1,300% has just gotten a lot of attention focused on Ripple, where for many years they didn't have that attention on them.
Global liquidity to any market, any country, any place, anywhere. Fully exchangeable to any currency, asset, or commodity. Transactions are settled in 4 seconds. XRP is traded 24/7, 365 days a year, everywhere in the world. Removing friction from global trade, removing barriers, removing borders. XRP transfers value anytime and all the time. From you to any place on Earth.